big countries right now that are holding the world to ransom, literally, by the fact that they have information or some form of leverage in some forum that allows them to hold other countries, including my own country, that hold them to supporting what is unsupportable.
Welcome back to Builders of the Broken Bazaar. Once again, I'm your host, Dr. Tabish Zaman. I'm not sure where to begin today because what we are seeing in and around us, and if you connect it to the last decade, the world has not simply become more unstable, it has become more normalized in its instability. Today, over 700 million people, they live in extreme poverty, surviving on less than $2.5 a day. More than half of the world, it lacks reliable social protection. And over 1 billion people, they live in countries where debt repayment exceeds spending on health or education. Now, this is not scarcity, this is prioritization. When we look at war is no longer episodic. According to the United Nations, a couple of years ago, 2024 recorded the highest number of active conflicts. And I don't need to tell you what's happening right now. Over 120 million people are now forcibly displaced, the highest figure ever recorded. In Gaza, the entire neighborhoods have been leveled. In southern Lebanon, cross-border exchange threatens regional escalation. In Sudan, famine warnings are no longer hypothetical. In eastern Congo, violence continues with barely sustained global attention. In Ukraine, the war grinds into attrition measured not in days but in generations. The Red Sea has become militarized. Shipping routes are destabilized. Global supply chains are trembling at the moment. And ordinary civilians, they are the ones carrying the cost. At the same time, International Court of Justice is hearing cases on genocide and state responsibility. The International Criminal Court is considering arrest warrants. International law is being invoked loudly and enforced cautiously. And here at home, university campuses, once space for dissent, have seen protest criminalized, encampment dismantled, and students disciplined. The language of rights remain intact. The application of rights feels selective. But then again, I bring this globally, military spending keeps on rising. It has surpassed $2.4 trillion. And since 2020, the 5 richest men in the world, they have doubled their wealth. 5 billion people have become poorer. And yet, we are told all of this is being managed. What are we offered? We are offered summits. We are offered panels. Again, emergency sessions at UN, COP negotiation, Davos roundtables, G7 statements by the countries. We live in the most administratively governed moment in human history. And yet millions and millions remain unprotected. So the systems are functioning. They are simply not functioning for people. And that brings us to today. So this discussion is not about announcing a solution. It is about sitting publicly with a question many institutions and individuals avoid. What does responsibility look like when the harm is systemic, power is unequal, and enforcement stops at influence? So I'm honored to bring Dominic Morgan again and sit across him and discuss something we have today on Builders of the Broken Bazaar. Welcome, Dominic.
Hi, I'm glad to be back. It's a good opportunity to have a chat.
It's lovely having you on this podcast again. I know you're friends of this podcast and you've contributed heavily with your conversation. But Dominic, everything I've just laid out, poverty, war, displacement, legal paralysis, these aren't abstract things. It's measurable. Again, we can document it. And it is increasingly normalized. So before we talk about what you have to say in terms of human promise, I want to start with some of the ideas we have been discussing. And these ideas, they don't come from nowhere. I mean, we look at the trust in institution, which obviously has collapsed. So looking back at all of what you've been reading, what you've been doing through your work, talk to us about that experience. Talk to us about what made you realize that this harm, which our society is facing at the moment, not just physical harm, how has this embedded into our system, which we are seeing in and around us?
Well, we live in a time where outrage spreads faster than understanding. I mean, that's the reality of it. Where opinion is loud, but responsibility is really quiet. Where it's easier to point outwards than it is to look within ourselves as individuals. The human promise, you reference it, it's not written to accuse anyone. It wasn't created to compete with ideologies. It sits completely non-partisan. It sits outside of that. It was not designed to divide people. It's more of a mirror, more of a compass. It asks something quite radical from us, not from governments, not from the institutions, but from me, from you. It asks, before I can demand justice, am I just?
Yeah.
Before I can call for truth, am I truthful? Before I ask the world to change, am I willing to change myself?
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about the human promise, and then I will come into, how some of our responsibilities shaping or should shape the institution we interact with. So where does it start with? How do we start with human promise, and what does it stand for?
Well, if I take a step back a bit,
Yeah.
okay, from my perspective, and I think we discussed this before. My background is dealing with crisis. That's what I've been dealing with for decades, and because of that, through the fire service, through the ambulance service, disaster response, and so on and so forth, is that I look at problems in a particular way because I have to. In a sense, I have no choice but to be very defined about what a problem is, what a challenge is, and therefore how to overcome it. Because often it means somebody's life, and sometimes more than one person's life at the end of my actions. So I have to be very clear about how I approach that. And the way that I have to approach it in an emergency environment, in a pre-hospital environment, is that I have to be very clear about what it is I'm trying to achieve. And I have to question the question. That's where I have to start. And in a sense, because of what's been happening around the world and what's been happening over particularly the last 2.5 years, but before, I genuinely believed that when I was watching the conflict in Syria and the nature of some of the barbaric things that were happening, barrel bombs being pushed out of helicopters onto civilian populations, I knew when I saw that, I knew that we would pay the price, that would come back to haunt us because it had set a new level of horror. It had set a new level of behavior that we hadn't seen before, which was often disguised because of the mainstream media, but also because of the way propaganda works. I mean, if you go back and you think about the way that we started to target terrorists after the 9/11, the war on terror, which was, led by the US. But the way we started to target people was not to find them, was to find them wherever they were, with their families, their wives, their communities, and bomb them all.
Yeah.
And that set a standard. That set a standard which we hadn't really seen for, if you think about it, really going back to the Second World War when we looked at the massive civilian bombing on both sides. The
Yeah.
Blitz in London, Dresden bombings. When you look at the way that civilians were then targeted, after that war, after the Second World War, the League of Nations was formed. That was a precursor to the United Nations, and we were very clear about that. We're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
We're not going
And
to behave that way again.
yeah, and sorry to interrupt here, Dominic, but I think there's a very interesting point you made here, especially for those of us who come from the non-Western, world. And for us, when we look at World War One and World War Two, of course, we did our history. We looked at how it was how it played out in front of us. And again, most of us read it, most of us read it through different accounts, and bringing it back to where we are right now. And you mentioned about how that was normalized, some of the things, at least in terms of bombing of a community, wiping out, the again, post 9/11 as well, how terrorists were targeted, like you mentioned. But I think for a lot of us coming from that part of the world, I think, again, I'm sorry if I'm bringing this up, but I felt Gaza and Palestine and the whole thing happening in front of us, that really gave us a picture, a complete picture of how this was happening to the entire community, how this was done with impunity and without any hesitation, which means there must have been a link of something like that in the past as well, because something has been done, which, like you're saying, it had been done in the past and it has happened in the past. So a lot of us don't relate to World War One or World War Two, for those of us who are from that part of the world, looking at what has happened. And of course, with your experience, you have seen, you've read, and you've known people as well who've been part of that in terms of facing the consequences. So where does it leave us now, right now, in terms of, again, coming back to the human promise and linking it to the responsibility of the institution, and how does it shape us, you and me?
Well, I mean, you're quite right to recognise the differences. I mean, I can tell you one of my experiences that was very profound to me was when I visited Pakistan in 2005 after the earthquake in Kashmir, and I was part of the first medical team, international medical teams on the ground, and I was shocked really by their knowledge of partition.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't taught. It wasn't taught in my school. I never heard of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't taught to English people. So the truth is that we're taught what we're led to believe, what people want us to believe, what people want us to remember. And it doesn't really matter which part of the world you come from. The reality is there will always be somebody that is trying to put down their version of events on top of us.
Yeah.
And I saw that in Kashmir. I saw it between India and Pakistan. And I was really profoundly affected by it because I just hadn't known. I had to come back myself and really understand and look at it. When you're talking about 3 million people died due to the action of partition in 1948, which was a decision made on paper.
Yeah.
It was a decision made on paper by colonial powers.
Yes.
That was what we're talking about here. But the impact of that was horrendous. I mean, trainloads of people being murdered on both sides.
Yeah.
And it shows how easy that propaganda, that storytelling can get us to believe things that really we should never have believed. Because the truth is, all of us have a universal set of core values.
Yeah.
I know this because I teach leadership, and one of the things I teach is about value-based leadership. And the first thing I have to really teach people is where their values come from. And what most of them don't realize, and it takes a explanation really, is to realize that actually your values when you're born, they come from the first person you ever meet in your life, the first person that gives you unconditional love, which is normally your mother.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not always. There's an unfortunate reality for some, but for the majority of humans, we are born into unconditional love.
Yeah.
And that love comes from our mother primarily as a carer, and then our parents, and surrounded by our siblings. But so do their values. They start to imprint their values on us as well. And we grow up listening to their stories, their beliefs, and our values start to become home. Now, for most people, those values are very good because they're the right values to impart. But it's not always the case.
Yeah.
It's not always the case. And I think we all now know that when we look at the way that politics works around the world and how people vote in a particular way and believe certain things that clearly are not in the interest of humanity and not in the interest of them either.
Yeah.
But as we get older, we then go to school and we get subjected to the values of the school, we get subjected to the values of the organizations we work to. And before you know it, actually your values are not really your own anymore. And I do this really simple exercise where I say to people, just list your top 10 values. Just give me your top 10 values. And people have to sit there and think, I'm not sure I've ever sat down and thought about my values. What are my values? Not the ones I've been given. And I explain that, not the ones you've been given, not the ones that have been parted from. What are your values? And what you find is that when you do that exercise with leaders, potential leaders, and what you find is that at the end of that exercise, we may use different phrases, we may use different words, but we are all saying the same thing. We are all saying the same thing. Honesty, integrity, kindness, all saying the same things. So it's amazing that we can get ourselves into a situation where we can believe that it's right to bomb or murder or slaughter another person in the name of an ideology or a religion or whatever it may be. Because the truth is, true religion doesn't doesn't make that case at all. But human beings do. We are subjected to this constantly, and we have been subjected to it for a long time, particularly in the West, far more than people realize, because there's this belief that we're free and that democracy is free, and democracy has never been free.
And
It's
I'm
never
I'm
been
so
free.
glad you're mentioning this, Dominic. This makes such an important point in terms of normalizing the violence. Again, we look at some of the data, for example, we're talking about how the United Nations, I don't know how much of a credibility it has left where it is right now, but it classifies over 40 conflict, as protracted. Again, we are seeing what you're saying at the moment, how children are born into war zones, and they reach adulthood without ever knowing what peace looks like. And again, this sort of life is ignorant in the Western world. We don't think as much. Again, look at the humanitarian agencies. They are planning multi-year budgets despite all the restrictions and cutting off so many big countries in terms of how violence will continue. So again, I'm sorry to bring this back again and again, but our responsibility as humans, which through the human promise which we are talking about, how does it link to the institution and their responsibility for those of us listening to us? So if you could tell us, then we can move into how or who the system protects, because that's also important when we are talking about the human promise.
Well, I think the first thing to understand is when we talk about the system, when we talk about them, what we're really talking about is us.
Okay.
Okay, we need to stop separating ourselves. Dehumanization is the first step towards, literally the first step towards slaughter. If you start to dehumanize someone, you start to make them less of a person, and therefore it's easier to justify the actions that you're taking against them. And we've seen this, particularly in the last few years, with the words animal and so on and so forth that are being used to dehumanize human beings. And that is really preparing all of us to do something that somebody else wants. And if you really think about it, who are these somebody that we're talking about? These institutions institutions like the UN were set up for the right reasons. They came from the League of Nations. They were set up for the right reasons. We didn't want to go that way again. We didn't want to see a war in Europe again. We didn't want to see a world war again. And we fought against that. And we set up these institutions, including things like the International Criminal Court. Yet individuals have made it their business to take that away from us, and actually, more than just take it away, actually make it completely irrelevant. Decide when they apply it. I mean, right now, what's happening in Iran is the hypocrisy at the highest level, because what we are seeing is people telling us that there are human rights issues in Iran, which most neutral observers would agree that there are human rights issues. But are those human rights issues any worse than what's happening in Gaza?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that if you measure what is actually happening, deliberate genocide in front of us, how can you describe that as some sort of moral position against another country? It's just impossible. But it shows how we've been woven into this belief that somehow the geopolitics is complicated and that we don't understand it, and it's complete crap. It's complete crap. We are all, as individuals, capable of referring to our own values.
And I think you've made the point very clearly in terms of where it starts, which is where we want to get at in terms of the the dehumanization, where we have been othering people, where we have been, dividing people or pushing them away in terms of where they come from, what sort of beliefs or values they have. And all that perpetuates into where we are. And again, like you mentioned, the system as well. And I want to talk about systems because they're a very important part of it. I know you mentioned about how we need to look at ourselves and we need to stop that separation because there are individuals out there who are doing this. But let's look at what is happening. Again, we are talking about it. In terms of the funding, the humanitarian funding, less than 20% it reaches the local organization, especially in the affected communities. Again, the decision making of some of those, it remains in the donor capitals. So when we look at the people who are affected, whether that is in Gaza, whether that is in, at the moment, Ukraine or Sudan or Congo, you name it, Nigeria, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Myanmar, literally there's a list at the moment. All that risk is very local to people. But when you look at the control of what happens to them is so far away from them. It is somewhere in the Brussels or in London or New York. That's where the decisions are being made. So what does it tell us about the lives the global systems are designed? So you mentioned about UN, right? It came up with a very honest and a good intention. But what does it tell us about the global system, which were actually meant to protect people and manage the sufferings? Again, I say managed not lightly, but let's shed a light on what the global system is and how, through human promise, which we are talking about, how it can actually help or how it can actually smash some of those existing patterns which has established itself.
Well, the first thing to recognize is that this is a shared reality.
Yeah.
Whatever you believe, whatever your beliefs are, and a belief is personal, and I will uphold everyone's right to their own beliefs, but this is a shared reality. We share it. No one has any more rights than anyone else.
Yeah.
That's the
But
reality of it.
why is it so difficult, Dominic, for
Because
people?
the truth is we don't live in a world like that. We don't live in a world where our values are leading us. We don't live in a world where values that we think, the values that we have, are leading institutions. That's not the world we live in. The world we live in
Is it a case that the Western population, and I don't say this lightly, having lived in this part of the world for 17 years, is it a case where the Western population, over a period of 100, 200, or 300 years, have assumed that moral, what I can call that better than the rest of the world, which allows them to make policies, which allows them to design policies, and then implement things which they feel works for them?
I think it's more complex than that. I think the
Mhm.
reality is that if you're born in Pakistan or India, or you're born in Asia somewhere, or you're born in Africa, or you're born in Britain, or you're born in a westernized country in Europe, or even in America, you're born. You're not born with a history. You don't come with some bank of information that allows you to plug in and go, okay, now I know what's really happening in the world. And in fact, what we're suffering from is exactly the opposite, is that actually we have so much information and so much of it distorted.
Mhm.
The victors always become the authors. So much of it distorted that it takes real truth to come out for us to understand what is happening. And for most of us, we're not really in a position as we grow, as we're younger, as we're not particularly faced to these things. And sometimes it takes the space to be able to look at this objectively and realize that actually my idea of the world isn't the real world at all. Now, I know that because I've traveled extensively in places to help, to
Mhm.
assist, whether it be an international disaster or whether it be a healthcare system in Africa. I've looked at these places and I've seen them. And the thing that strikes me constantly, whenever I go anywhere, is one, how similar we all are.
Yeah.
Is just how similar we are. Our aspirations, our desires, our values. It's just how similar we are. Don't get me wrong. There are bad people wherever you go.
Yeah.
I mean, That's the reality of it. There's no such thing as perfection. It's a theoretical concept. Don't try to achieve it because it doesn't exist. The closest thing to perfection is actually imperfection of the system that is creation, that creates evolution, that's created everything. For us to try to reach perfection, we will never be there. Let's not try, but let's try to do better.
Yeah.
We don't have to accept what is happening now. And the truth is that most of us, whether you're taught to believe that you're second class, or you're taught to believe that you're first class,
Yeah.
or that you're taught to believe that you come from an underdeveloped country, you're taught to believe you come from a democracy and you have some sort of moral rights. You're both being taught the wrong thing.
I think
The
that's a great
reality is
point. Yeah, that's a
we are
wonderful
all
point.
being taught the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's where the human promise comes in. So when I looked at where we are now and I looked at the failing systems, the international systems that we have invested in, both financially and morally to help us, have failed us, completely failed us because of the corruption, the corrupted Security Council, and they're being corrupted by one or two organizations that sit there and support each other in their corrupted ideal. The only conclusion you can come to is that this shared reality is corrupted.
Yeah. And does it actually link to, I think that, the points which you've just made, I think it is so well knits itself to the human promise. And you mentioned about the international system, again, within which a lot of us see the UN and the Security Council. But when international law is invoked in a way, but it's not enforced, does it actually tell us about the limits of the accountability architecture, if I may say that, if that's the word? It exposes the limit of what or where it can go, and what we are seeing right now in application as well, isn't it?
Well, the truth is that the International Criminal Court is a really good example because it doesn't have any powers in its own right.
Okay.
It doesn't have an enforcement. There's no prison.
Yeah.
It relies on countries to enact
Yeah.
what it says. So when it finds something and says we're issuing an arrest warrant for this individual, it relies on the international community to carry that out, not to allow somebody that has an international arrest warrant to come into their country without being arrested. But of course, that is corrupted by wealth. When we know that wealth and colonialism is a form of collecting wealth, whether it be in land, whether it be in resources, whether it be in finances, whether it be in oil, whatever you want to put it in, it's a collection of wealth. That collection of wealth comes from fear. That's what that comes from. Fear right across the board. And even the fear when you go, I mean, it's surprising when I've been to Africa and I've been in places where people have nothing. I mean, literally nothing. They're struggling to survive. But it is amazing to see them. It is amazing to see that level of freedom because they don't carry this weight that many of us carry because we feel like we have to be something, we have to earn something, we have to own something.
Yeah.
We have to, it has to be bigger, better, faster, whatever we want to do, latest. We've been driven into this consumption society, which is all about wealth. It's all about wealth creation. And the truth is that wealth being measured by money, as many people will say, but the truth is when you really think about it, is that really wealth?
Yeah.
Is that really wealth? Is money really wealth? Because it was a book that was written by a healthcare worker who wrote about the 5 things that people really think about when they're dying. And he worked in geriatric care in nursing homes and collected all these statements from people that were dying. And every single one of them, nobody ever mentioned money.
Yeah.
They never mentioned money. They never mentioned I wanted a bigger house or I wanted a bigger car. It's all, I wish I'd spent more time with my family and my friends.
And this makes us all human, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned about the countries, and countries are made of people, how we look at things. And of course, you mentioned fear. And we're talking about economic side as well. And, that was such a good example in terms of how, we are looking at heavens, or our time comes near and no one is talking about money the same way, or that doesn't get discussed at all. But what we are seeing right now, Dominic, in terms of course, who we are, where we come from, where we live, what we do, if we look at And I want to talk about this because this has been plaguing me so much into what you just mentioned. Of course, money is on one side, but the whole notion around silence as well, how structural this is. And again, I can give you some examples in terms of what countries are facing. For example, Sudan, we're talking about the hunger. Eastern Congo, where millions are being displaced in some form or the other. And when you look at how and I'm not even talking about Gaza here or Palestine, but those crises which are happening in Africa, they receive such episodic attention and then they fade. They are in the news and then they go away. So how do we actually understand silence, not just in terms of the absence, but something so structured, which is shaped by geopolitical interest? And again, you mentioned about the economic side as well, but there are media hierarchies, there are interests which are at play so heavily. So how does this human promise actually come into play, and we try to speak up against some of these through these promises which we will undertake as part of human promise?
Well, the human promise is really simple. I mean, it's not a slogan, okay?
Yeah.
It's a commitment. That's what it is. What it's saying is, so when I looked at the problem as a crisis intervention, what I realized is the problem wasn't that we didn't have values, that we don't have universal values. It's just that we're not aligned. There are 8 billion of us. Those in power would like to give you the impression they're the majority. They are not.
Yeah.
They have never been the majority. There is 8 billion odd of us. They are a very small minority. When you talk about how many people own the world when it comes to finances, how much money is sat within a very small group of people, these people would like to give you the impression that they are the majority. It's absolute not true.
Yeah.
What is true is that they divide.
Yeah.
They find ways to divide us. And some of these people were born into that thinking. I mean, they were born into it. They probably don't even know they're doing it because of how bad they are. And some people are very clearly know what they're doing and are using division and propaganda to make us believe certain things. So one of the things that they make us believe is that if we put our head above the parapet, we will lose comfort.
Yeah.
So we will lose what we've got. And it's, if you think about it, it's the old tribal mechanism, isn't it? It's about safety in numbers. It's if you go back in our evolutionary period when we were tribal, you would think, well, I might be the one individual that has a different view from everyone else, but is it safe for me to say it?
Yeah.
Is it safe for me to put my hand up?
Very valid.
And they make you believe that you're the one individual. Yeah. They make you believe that you're the minority. And it's not true. We are the majority of people. Our values are universal. They come with us from birth. When you strip away all the values that have been printed on us, we're all the same.
Yeah.
I've never met anyone yet, never, who doesn't have those values. Even people that have committed awful crimes will still put their hand out to in their context of what they think is the right value to. They will still believe they have values. But they've whitewashed them. They've literally stood behind other people's beliefs and made those beliefs become more important than theirs. And they hold that over you because they say, if you step out of line, look at Francesca.
Fear.
If you step out of line, we will remove finance from you. You will be person non grata. You will not be able to succeed or even survive without assistance from other people in this world, because we will alienate you. What crime has Francesca Albanese done? What she's done is highlight corruption.
At every level.
Every level. Yes. And the corruption, we're not talking about money. Yeah. We're talking about corruption. We're talking about that the system itself is corrupted, and she has highlighted that, and she is a voice in the darkness sometimes, standing alone saying that. But the reality is she isn't alone. She isn't alone. There are 8 billion of us that stood behind her saying the same thing. The difference is she's prepared to put her head above the parapet. She's prepared to do that. The question that the human promise raises is not whether you're prepared to do that. Is whether you are prepared to live your life in a way that is to your values. It's a really simple commitment.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a commitment to protect life. Simple as that.
Yeah. And I think that's a very good point in terms of the clarity of the human promise. And I'm so glad you gave that example. Now, at that level, of course, we are seeing people behind, supporting some of those names who get out of their comfort zone and try to do things which are good for humanity. But for us, and again, for all of us, for the rest of us, we also need to, and that's why I want to keep this conversation so human. And I want to recognize some of the structural harm which has been done by these group of people who impose their values on others in a way. And I really don't want to go away from, so I spoke about silence here. I also want to talk about poverty which has become I mean, if you look at the data for the last 30 years, the discussion around it has literally stagnated. Again, Oxfam, it tells us that it would take over 200 years for the poorest half of the humanity to escape poverty at the current rate. So, again, this is where our human promise also plays a role in trying to understand how this is not volatility. Again, I'm not pronouncing that word correctly, but it's more of a design. And at that scale, when you look at people, for them, it's not just economic misfortunes. Can we go with a human promise into looking at how it can help a part of the world? It can help the majority of the population, which is suffering in terms of the basic needs and basic understanding of what is happening around them.
Well, if you're prepared to follow the human promise, and it might be useful just to say the 5 things of what the human promise
Yes,
is.
please.
So, the human promise is a commitment to protect life, to seek and speak the truth, to act with justice and compassion, to create and share hope, and to repair what has been broken. And that is it. There is no more than that. It's just a really simple commitment where you decide in your life that actually those 5 things are more important than anything else. And I'm going to live my life that way. So that means every decision I make, and you're making about 30,000 decisions a day, that every decision I make, and it's not that many conscious decisions, many are unconscious, but the conscious decisions that you make, that you actually commit to that. You live it. So in other words, you decide, if I'm going to buy something, who am I buying it from? Who's supporting? I mean, you and I right now are using IT systems that are owned by companies that are supporting genocide. We are trapped into this corrupted existence that allows money to be made from what we're doing to be literally diverted into genocide. And that is the reality of it. That is the actual reality of where we are. So we have to make a decision. We have to decide at some point that we're going to change it. Not that we want to change it, not that we're going to complain about it not being changed, because we've been very good at that. We've been very good at pointing out what's wrong. We're really good at pointing out, and that's what human beings are great at. Teach this in leadership, is that we are very good at recognizing when something is wrong. We're not so good at recognizing what is right. It goes back to evolution. If you think of the animal in the forest, when it hears a noise, it immediately knows there's something wrong, because it's survival instinct in all of us. Because people like to think that we have no connection to the natural world. It's like, where do you think we came from? The reality is that we have a common ancestor with monkeys, apes, and bonobos that was a tree-dwelling ancestor, and we are one of the 3 branch lines that come off that. So we lived in those environments ourselves, and we still have that within us. We're really good at recognizing when something is wrong, but we're not very good at recognizing when something is right. So we're quick to point out what is wrong. The truth is, all well and good, but it's not going to change anything. It's not going to change anything. Now, I don't see myself as any better than any other person on this planet. But equally, I don't see them as any better than me either, because equality means equality. Equality in opportunity, equality in rights, equality in the right to life, the equality in justice. All of it means that we need to find a way to step forward. And I have always believed this. And I once told this to Gordon Brown, would you believe, in 10 Downing Street. I actually said to him that I'm a true socialist, because I believe if we're not moving forward together, then we're just not moving forward. It's as simple as that. So when people talk about challenge, the first thing you have to recognize is we're talking about global.
Yeah.
We're not talking about one color over another color. We're not talking about one family over another family. There is only one family. It's a human family. It may be of many different parts, but it is one family. And when we talk about justice, when we talk about equality, when we talk about compassion, when we talk about hope, and we talk about repairing what is broken, we are talking about all of us.
Yeah.
We're talking about the whole. There's no longer any way that we will move forward if we keep talking about us and them.
Okay.
We are the them.
Yeah.
We're just them to somebody else.
And nothing better than what you mentioned about us, about the global, about that connection. We cannot avoid or we cannot ignore the question, and I'm sorry to bring this up, but we cannot avoid the question of technology and how what we are surrounded with at the moment. I mean, as much as it has got a meaningful appeal for us to get connected, how companies sell their system, how artificial intelligence is being spoken about. But quite rightly, it hasn't got that heart. It hasn't got that. Are you saying that, or are you willing to talk to us about the human promise to leverage a sort of a vision which is obviously surrounded by technology and different forms of technology and people across the generation, people from all over the world, that it would give that clarity to see that it's not that the technology which is deciding things for us. It is these promises which is giving us that clarity to see how things are in front of us, and we are able to make those decisions in the long run.
I mean, the bottom line is that the future holds. I mean, the future's not real. You know that.
Yeah.
It's not real. The only thing that's real is now. That's it.
Yeah.
The past is gone. It's outside of our control whatsoever. I mean, I don't know anyone that's invented a time machine yet. You can't go back and change it. It is what it is. Okay, so the point of change has to be now, because the future, as it reveals itself to us, becomes the now. So the decisions we make now are the decisions that we will live with. That's the reality of it. And if we continue this cycle of death, slaughter, injustice, inequality, if we continue this, there is no future.
Yeah.
There is no future. That's the reality of it. Because the planet probably won't last as long as we keep going. It just won't do that. We're destroying our very home by our actions, by our connection to the environment.
Yeah.
The fact that we feel that we're not here anymore, the fact that we feel that for some reason nature is over there outside, whereas actually we're not part of it. Of course we're part of it. This is only one home, only one shared reality, only one family. And if we continue to be ununited, if we continue to form those barriers and boundaries between us, we will not succeed.
Yeah.
Now, I am always accused of being an optimist, always. And I always say to people, I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm a realist is because I've seen what we're capable of. I have really seen it. And the reason I've seen it is because I have been at the end of people's lives in some of the most distressing circumstances you can ever find yourself to be in. If you think of international disasters, okay, and I've seen what human beings are capable of. I've seen how bad we can be, but I've seen something far, far better. I've seen something that outstrips all of that. I've seen our values. And I know that the values of humanity far outweigh every other thing that's going on. We just have to mobilize that now. We have to align ourselves across boundaries, across countries, across religions, across ideologies. We have to step up and say, okay, how are we going to achieve this?
Yeah.
Well, there's only one way to achieve it, and that's to become aligned behind our values.
I think that brought us nicely to what we're gonna talk about next in terms of starting with the human promise, because I'm sure both you and me are very well aware of how goals are created, how frameworks are created, and again, nothing better than looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. None of them are on track. Not because, again, it's not about the target, but because, again, conflict, inequality, political caution, they push us back as progress is concerned. So tell me this, framing it your way, because it all came up, discussion, having that debate, having that dialogue. What were you trying to name with human promise? What actually stands out for you when you talk about human promise to begin with?
A moral commitment,
Yeah,
a shared moral commitment. It was really simple. It was, I saw the morality that existed in all of us. I've seen it in many, many different places. I'm forever impressed by those people that have deep religious beliefs and those people that don't have deep religious beliefs, but also have values. And everywhere you go, you see it. And I can't help but see it.
yeah,
I've used it as a leader. I've used it to my advantage many, many times to help other people. It's to show them that don't be afraid of your emotions.
yeah,
You're always taught that your emotions are weak. No, don't. Your emotions are the thing that make you go, hang on, that's wrong. I'm going to do this because that's right. It's your values that underpin you. And the way I described it, it was someone once said to me, they said, we are surrounded by data points,
yeah.
billions of them. I said, and we can't, the brain is incapable. I mean, when you make decisions through the day, your decisions actually get worse through the day. And the reason for that is because it takes a lot of mental activity to keep yourself where you need to be to make the right decisions. So you can make less and less as the day goes on. But the reality is that you're surrounded by data points and we can't really calculate that. Although we have the most powerful thing that evolution has yet delivered, the human brain, powerful enough to even visualize the universe within it, we still have to find ways to function. So what we do is we collect all those data points into patterns and we call those patterns information. And then we take those patterns and we create from that information, we create knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And that knowledge is sometimes not real. Sometimes that knowledge is not the knowledge that the truth. It's somebody else's truth, which they're trying to impress on you. A good example is anyone that can send thousands of young men to their deaths because they're following an ideal that's not even theirs. But the reality is that's what happens. We build knowledge. But the difference between knowledge and wisdom is only one thing, and that is values.
Yeah.
It's what you do with that knowledge. So the first thing that we have to recognize is that actually we are in a really difficult situation globally.
Yeah.
This is probably the biggest crisis that humanity has ever faced, because we're not talking about not knowing this crisis. We actually know what's going on. We know the level of depravity that's going on. We know the level of slaughter. We can see it. We're witnesses to it daily, hourly. We're witnesses to it.
Yeah.
So we have to decide how we're going to use that wisdom. And if its wisdom is based on values, then surely the way out must be based on values as well.
But do you think, and again, I'm just comparing the human promise to some of the things which already exists out there. And again, when I say that in terms of, would you say international humanitarian law? The writing is so clear when we talk about the Geneva Convention or the UN Charter or the International Court of Justice. Yet we see those breaches. Again, I would name it Israel in Gaza, very, very clear. And the sort of continued diplomatic and military backing from the United States. Again, it is just an example, a very short example. So in a world where law exists, but the enforcement stops at power, what does human promise? And again, we may have a clear answer to that, or we are in early stages, but what does human promise require that current legal system do not do enough or do not go far enough?
I think we've discussed it really. We've named it. Okay, it's not that the systems are wrong. It's not that the UN is wrong. It was a brilliant idea. Okay, and if it worked, it would be a brilliant idea. But for it to work, it has to be empowered, and it's not going to be empowered by those that own the wealth and those that are corrupted. Let's name it as it is. There are corrupted countries right now that are holding the world to ransom. Holding the world to ransom, literally, by the fact that they have information or some form of leverage in some forum that allows them to hold other countries, including my own country, in the country that you live in, including that they hold them to supporting what is unsupportable which is you cannot justify what is happening in Gaza, and you cannot justify what is happening in Palestine. You never could. Okay, you can't justify genocide wherever it exists.
Yeah.
You can't justify conflict
But
wherever it exists.
do you think, Dominic, here selective enforcement we are talking about in terms of how it corrodes the actual legitimacy? So, which is where I think it's very important to talk about why human promise, which we are talking about, it actually rejects coercion in
Okay,
its foundation principle.
I think it would be useful. We just let's read the human promise, okay, as what it says, and let's see, having read it, where we think those answers might come from. So the first thing is the human promise is really simple. I promise to protect life in all its forms and fragile beauty.
Hmm.
Okay, that's a really simple sentence. I promise to seek and speak the truth and live by it, even when it is difficult. We know that what's going on around the world at the moment is that we are being force fed an untruth in many aspects of I mean, what's going on right now? You know, we're gonna invade Iran because they're breaking international law from a country that isn't signed up to the nuclear treaty, that won't let other countries, the international community, look at its own nuclear weapons, that refuses to recognize international law, but it wants to enforce that on someone else.
Yeah.
It's hypocrisy on the highest order, but it's truth. It's truth that we have to find, and its truth is going to be difficult. I mean, what we're seeing so far, especially in the last few months, and the level of information that's being shared with us now about how corrupted what the so-called leadership elite is frightening. It's absolutely frightening. But we have to grasp the truth. We have
Yeah.
to. And then I promise to act with justice and compassion, so none are abandoned or forgotten. And that means everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, it doesn't matter whether you're a child poor on the streets of Lagos, or you're sat in Israel trying to find the right way forward within this horror that Zionism has created. The reality is nobody should be abandoned. Nobody should be forgotten. We have to find a way to bring everyone with us. And that starts with a really simple thing, which is justice, real justice and compassion. If we put those two things together, we will bring everyone with us.
Yeah.
And then I promise to create and share hope through kindness, courage, and imagination. We are capable of so much, and I have seen it time and time again. We are the peak of evolution. We are at the very top of anything that's ever been created. Whatever your beliefs are of how we got here, we are it. This is it. This is our time. But if we don't grasp reality and create more and better from where we are, then we will not succeed. And then I promise to repair what has been broken, to rebuild trust where it has been lost. I promise that. I promise to do what has been broken. If you think about that, we're not just talking about the planet. We're not just talking about systems. We're talking about lives. Things have been broken to a point where horrific is too easy a word to use. It's too easy. It does not describe the nature of what we are seeing. So we have to correct this. We have to repair it. And the human promise, it's a moral commitment, but it is not innocent. It does not sit there and say, I'm neutral. What it says is, you've got to live your life like this. You've got to stop you've got to stop saying it and carrying on taking your kids to McDonald's. You can't do the same. The two things are not compatible. You cannot keep supporting certain organizations, certain institutions, certain companies. You cannot continue to do that if their behavior does not support the human promise. If it doesn't support those 5 values, we cannot support them. We have to change. Now, as it stands at the moment, when you go to the polls, what happens is that most people tell you what they're going to do. They tell you, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Vote for me and we'll do this and we'll deliver that. Nobody ever sits there and says, well, what is it you really want? You know, what is it you really would sign up to? Sooner or later, if enough of us say, this is what we want,
Yeah.
this is our moral standard, This is the minimum requirement. This is what we're not prepared to bend on. This is what we're not prepared to be corrupted on. If enough of us say that, sooner or later, those people that claim to represent us will have to recognize that if they want to represent us, they're going to have to represent that. They're going to have to be really clear about what is the minimum things that we require.
Yeah.
And it's not difficult, just 5 things. That's all it is, just
Yeah.
5 things.
And I think you've very well illustrated that. And what I like about this is really as to how it gives us an opportunity to reflect on not just the failure of us as human beings to where we are right now, but how do we move on in a way which is very constructive to the rest of the world? And which is what brings me to this question: who is this for? Because in a global order where, of course, we're talking about influences, it's very important to ask, who is this human promise really for? And who are the people or who are the individual who are most likely to resist it, and why?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that those that have very strong beliefs and ideology that doesn't support those principles are going to find that difficult. But then the question shouldn't really be about that. It's not about the individuals. It's about the commitment that you make as an individual yourself. If before I ask someone else to change, what am I prepared to do?
Yeah.
What does it mean for me? And if we stop questioning everyone else first and start questioning ourselves and realize that you cannot fight external power of military, money, politics, you cannot fight that with external power.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
You'd have to have more than them. We destroy our home even trying to achieve that. It would just be stupid. It would be an unwinnable war, which all wars are unwinnable to a point because nobody really wins. Just people just suffer. So we have to find a different way. And the way is not external power at all. It's internal. It's us. And that starts with us, you and me, looking at the way we talk about things, looking at how we might dehumanize people, looking at the way that we seek and speak the truth. And are we really speaking the truth? Are we prepared to go that step that puts our head above the parapet, that makes us maybe stand out in the tribe? Are we prepared to do that? What are you prepared to do that would make you feel uncomfortable with your tribe? Because the reality is, if you feel uncomfortable in a tribe, then the tribe's own morals, the tribe's own ideology is holding you back. There is nothing at all that is there that can really hold back us. The only thing that holds us back is our thinking that limits our thinking.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. When you realize what that truly means, you look at the world in a completely different way. You look at it as though every single thing is on the table. Everything is on the table. There is nothing that you can take off. But when you look at it that way, you realize that the problem isn't that we're not clever enough to work this out. The problem is we're just not aligned.
Yeah.
There's not enough of us saying the simple things in a clear way that makes everyone else say, well, actually, that's what I believe.
Yeah.
That's what I'm prepared to do. That's what I'm prepared to change myself to fit that and make sure that I live my life by a minimum moral commitment, a minimum moral standard that says this is what it takes to be a human being. The end of the promise sits really simple. What it says is, this is my promise.
Yeah.
This is our promise. This is a promise of being human. It's a human promise.
Yeah.
It's what are we prepared to promise each other to find our way forward?
Now, at this note, Dominic, in terms of, I think you very well illustrated, the aspects of human promise. But before we close, I think this is a very important question. I don't want to leave this unattended. But if human promise is serious and not just symbolic, the question comes around, how does it actually generate that real currency towards real on the ground work, or at least the changes which we would like to see happen, whatever form or shape that may be, in terms of helping people, in terms of supporting people. Again, I know we would carry those promises with us as we go in and around our lives doing different things. But how does it actually ensure that it is not, and this is very important, it's not just symbolic? And where do you envision this making a change on the ground? In what shape, what form?
I'm nodding because it is. I've put this out there, so I've articulated it. That's it. That's the end of my, in a sense, of my ownership. I don't own it. Okay, I made it very, very clear. It's not owned by me. It's owned by humanity. It was released on the 1st of March, Zero Discrimination Day. It was released on that day on purpose to align with that ideology, to make it really clear that nobody should be left out and nobody should be abandoned. And we need to really question ourselves about what we mean by discrimination. That truth element of it, we really do need to question ourselves. But what it really means is this, is that we have enough institutions that can make changes. They're just not empowered. Okay, there's not enough voices that sit behind them and say, no, this is what we believe, this is what we want. Also, that actually, if I'm prepared to hold myself to account and I'm prepared to live my life like that, I'm prepared to hold other people to it as well. And that's where the changes is going to come. That's where we're going to start to see the change for humanity, where we start to recognize that actually I'm prepared to live by a moral minimum standard. I'm prepared to sign up to that. And that's all it is. It's completely voluntary. Nobody is forced to say this. And the only two things we ask, and that's all we've done, and we put it out there, the only two things we ask is to say, leave it in its pure form. Just leave the words as they are, because they stand up for themselves. But in your own words, in your, just say why you're making it, why you're prepared to live it. Because the truth is that all change, all cultural change, all movements start with a moral alignment first.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, they fail. It's as simple as that, because there is no ground for them to move on to. So we have to become aligned first. But believe me, when we become aligned, if you've seen it time and time again in humanity, where humanity starts to see a standard and says, no, this is a standard that I believe in. And we become aligned behind it, and it becomes second nature. We start to build our rules around it. We start to build our laws around it. We start to empower our organizations around it. Like I said, this is not about replacing these international systems and organizations that should work. It's about ensuring they do work, because they are empowered by the people that are actually taking those decisions to live their lives by. And it's so easy for us to say, yeah, I agree with it, but carry on as though it doesn't mean anything. And that's where the problem is. That's essentially where that's the challenge that we face. But I can tell you this with 100% certainty, it will work. It will work. It's a very small thing. It's only got 5 elements to it. It's just a human promise that says, this is what it's like to be a human being, and I promise to do it this way. I promise to live my life this way. I promise to be a human this way. But those 5 things, however small they are, they're big enough to change culture. And if you can change culture, then you can change action. And action always follows. It always follows. But alignment has to come first. And that's what I saw when I came and saw the problem. That's what I saw when I saw the challenge, was that if you can get the alignment right, if you can get it simplified, universal, then you can start to really change things. You can really start to change things. And this is not about sitting back on our laurels. This is about living it. And living it means taking action, personally and collectively. And it's only that that's going to save us. There's nothing else that's going to save us. Because if you've got a better answer, I'm all ears.
Thank you. Dominic, thank you ever so much. And I'm so grateful that you've shared this with us on Builders of the Broken Bazaar. And I'm extremely grateful that the ideas have been discussed this way. So this conversation wasn't about fixing the world. It was about refusing to let responsibility dissolve into procedure. So human promise, as Dominic mentioned, does not replace law or politics. It insists that responsibility continues when the process actually ends. The Charter is not a declaration of virtue. It is an invitation to stay in the present longer than the system actually requires. So if you're listening, don't ask whether you agree. Ask where responsibility currently stops in your work, your institution, and more importantly, your silence. And would it mean for you to just stay there for a little longer? And up until next time, please keep questioning, keep listening, and keep building here in the Broken Bazaar.